My next Patreon question comes from Diver, who wanted to know about how people, myself included, look and critique movies based on books. I remember years ago you gave a negative review of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory starring Gene Wilder, and much of your criticism had to do with the film's many deviations from the Roald Dahl novel. However, you later went on to declare 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea as your favorite live-action Disney film. 20,000 Leagues is not exactly a faithful adaptation of the Jules Verne novel either. There's also a ton of deviations in the movie. I personally feel, while it's fine as a film, it could have followed the book more closely than it did. What's the double standard? How can you like an unfaithful adaptation of one book but dislike another? That's an excellent question, and he used a great example to highlight it. I'm not hugely fond of the Willy Wonka video now, and it's mainly because I spend far too much time comparing it to the book rather than criticizing it on its own terms. When I later made a video about Tim Burton's adaptation of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, I made a point of not even mentioning the book until near the end of the video. Part of the reason I compared Willy Wonka so much to its source material is my sentimental attachment to Dahl's book. That was my favorite childhood book, so I was bothered by the deviations. That's not something I can help. But revisiting the film recently, I did find my main problems with things like the pacing, sentimentality, production design, songs, and the performances of the child actors. Filmmaking decisions largely unrelated to any changes from the book. Diver brought up 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and how I've praised the film despite supposedly changing a lot from Jules Verne's original text. The truth is, I've never read that book, so I'm unfamiliar with what was changed. But it's fitting he bring up a Disney production, since they are famous for changing a lot of things in their adaptations. Homeward Bound, for example, takes a lot of liberties with Sheila Burnford's book The Incredible Journey, including changing the breeds of the dogs. I like the book, but I also really like Homeward Bound 2, as well as the more faithful 1963 adaptation. Speaking of dog movies, the recently released Call of the Wild kept a lot of the narrative but changed a considerable amount too. Without spoiling anything, a few characters are given expanded roles, the third act plays somewhat differently, and a male character is rewritten as an indigenous woman. I really liked the book, and none of these changes bothered me. I still thought the filmmakers respected Jack London's original text and adapted it beautifully, and these alterations made sense, especially considering a few things in the 1903 book would not fly today for understandable reasons. The thing is, film is a different medium from books, and changes are necessary in order to translate the story to the screen. A famous example of a film adaptation changing things is The Shining, and there is still debate over whether these changes were good or not. I think a lot of the creative decisions Kubrick made, like changing Jack Torrance's reasons for going crazy, worked in the film. While this radically altered the theme of the book, there was still a chilling element present. Stephen King produced a miniseries in the 90s, and it was incredibly faithful to the book. If you want an almost accurate translation of the source material, the miniseries does the job. However, it also highlighted why Kubrick changed things, like going for a hedge maze rather than hedge animals, and going for an axe as Jack's weapon of choice rather than a croquet mallet. One thing I will agree with King on is the characterization of Wendy Torrance. Kubrick made her mousy and sniveling, while King's version was more intelligent and able to defend herself better, and I personally prefer that take. Harry Potter has also led to interesting discussions. I see a lot of Harry Potter fans rank the adaptation of Prisoner of Azkaban near the bottom of their rankings, due to the changes from the book. I consider myself a Harry Potter fan, and yet that movie is one of my favorites. Aside from the students now wearing regular clothes on Hogwarts grounds, I wasn't that bothered by how Alfonso Cuarón and Steve Kloves chose to adapt the material. I did find it unusual they never tell us the identity of the creators of the Marauders map, but that's not a deal breaker for me. Truthfully, I've grown less annoyed with film adaptations changing things from books since I made that Willy Wonka video over a decade ago. In the end, it's how the filmmakers execute the story that matters more than fidelity. Thank you for the question, Diver.